So it's a pretty well-known fact that people just go missing sometimes, more than we'd like to believe. And as eerie as missing persons cases are, mass disappearances are on a whole other level. How do multiple people go missing or die under incredibly weird circumstances with no explanation? That's what we're about to explore today. I'm your host James, and these are the top 10 unsettling cases of mass disappearances that remain unsolved. And we're starting off the list with the Anjukuni village incident. This incident went down in November of 1930 up in the northern wilds of Canada. A fur trapper was set to make a stop at the Anjukuni Inuit village to trade furs, but when he arrived, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The whole place was deserted, not a soul around. The trapper claimed that the food supplies were still there, but the people were gone. He went to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and they sent a detachment to check things out. Their report backed up the trapper's story. The village was empty, and it seemed that the 2,000 Inuit residents had vanished without a trace. The villagers had left behind some strange things too. Sled dogs had been left behind to starve to death, and even rifles had been left behind. Things you just wouldn't abandon. The official line from the Mounties was that the Inuit probably just up and left due to some kind of panic or mass migration, but the sheer abruptness of it all makes for a pretty eerie mystery. I mean, like, why leave your gear and your dogs behind? At our number 9 spot is the Yuba County 5. This all went down in February of 1978 in California, and it's a pretty baffling story. So 5 men, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Wire, and Gary Matthias set out for a college basketball game in a 68 Mercury Montego. Each had varying degrees of intellectual disability or psychiatric conditions. Now, after the game, they went missing. The car was later found stuck in the snow in the Plumas National Forest, but the guys were nowhere to be seen. And then months later, 4 of them turned up, dead in the wilderness. They died from exposure, and it seemed like they struggled to survive. They were found in an abandoned trailer with some clothing taken from another trailer nearby. But Gary Matthias was never found. No trace. It's like the guy just vanished into thin air. The whole case was obviously pretty strange. Why leave the car, and why head into the snowy woods in the first place? Nothing added up. The case remains a complete mystery to this day. And at number 8, we have the Flight 19 incident. So Flight 19 was a squadron of 5 US Navy Avenger torpedo bombers that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle on December 5th, 1945, during routine training flight. So the squadron departed from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale in Florida on a navigation exercise known as Navigation Problem 1. The flight was led by experienced pilot Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor and was scheduled to fly eastward for a certain distance, then turn north and finally west back to base. Shortly into the exercise, Taylor reported that his compass was malfunctioning, leading him to believe that the squadron had flown off course. Flight 19 continued to fly in various directions, and the situation became increasingly challenging for both the pilots and ground control. As fuel levels started to drop, Taylor eventually instructed the pilots to ditch their aircraft in the ocean once they realized they could not find land. The last radio transmission from Flight 19 occurred around 6:20 p.m., indicating that the pilots were preparing to abandon their planes. No distress signals or emergency calls were received after that point. An even stranger flying boat was sent out in search of the missing pilots, and that aircraft went missing as well as all 13 crew on board. No wreckage or traces of Flight 19 or the search and rescue crew were ever found. Number 7, Roanoke Colony. In 1587, a group of about 115 settlers established the Roanoke Colony, led by John White. Soon after, White left the island to return to England for supplies and more assistance. He made it back to the island by 1590, expecting to be greeted by the settlers, but astonishingly, there was nobody there. The entire colony had seemingly vanished without a trace. There were no dead bodies and virtually no clues as to where they could have gone, aside from the words Croatoan carved into a post and Crow on a nearby tree. One theory suggests that the settlers may have relocated to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras Island, as indicated by the carvings. They also may have attempted to escape the island by sea and got lost. Another possibility is that they integrated with the native population. There have been numerous speculations over the centuries, but the fate of the Roanoke Colony is one of American history's greatest mysteries to this day. Next up on the list, we have the Flannan Isles Lighthouse incident. Lighthouses have a certain vibe about them, don't they? They've always been the perfect setting for a ghost tale. Well, this next lighthouse story is a real-life documented incident, one of the strangest cases of mysterious mass vanishings in history. On December 15th, 1900, a ship noticed that the Flannan Isles Lighthouse on the west coast of Scotland didn't seem to be operating. This information reached a relief vessel, which arrived on the 26th. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, the keepers, were nowhere to be found. The beds were unmade, the clock had stopped, and a set of outdoor oilskins were missing. The island's log revealed some strange entries in the days leading to their disappearance. On December 12th, Thomas Marshall noted severe winds, but nothing too out of the ordinary, but he mentioned that James Ducat, the second keeper, had been quiet, and Donald MacArthur, the third keeper, was crying. The relief keeper reported that the lighthouse's equipment and lamps were in working order. It was as if the keepers had simply vanished into thin air. And at number 5, we have the case of the Sodder family. In the rugged hills of West Virginia, the Sodder family lived a simple life. George and Jenny Sodder, two Italian immigrants, were building a life with their 9 children. But fate had a cruel twist in store for them on Christmas Eve of 1945. Fire erupted in the home. George and Jenny, along with 4 of their children, managed to escape the inferno. But where were the other 5? Days turned into weeks, and the Sodders clung to hope. They believed that they were still alive because there were no bodies to be found. The authorities were quick to chalk the tragedy up to an electrical mishap, claiming the fire started inside the house, but George and Jenny just weren't buying it. They knew the house had been recently rewired and inspected. George had been unafraid to voice his disdain for the fascist government of Italy at the time, and believed the fire may have had ties to the Sicilian mafia. He thought his outspokenness had drawn their attention. The vanishing of the MV Joyita crew. The MV Joyita was a merchant vessel, and on October 3rd of 1955, it left Samoa for the Tuvalu Islands. But when it failed to reach its destination, folks got worried. The trek was only supposed to take 48 hours. On November 10th, the Joyita was found adrift about 600 miles off course. The ship was in bad shape too. It was partially submerged, and there was no sign of the 25 people who should have been on board. Lifeboats were missing, and there were indications of a struggle, with bloodstains in a doctor's bag that had been tossed around. The Joyita was meant to stay afloat even if flooded, but it was almost underwater. But it didn't sink, and it was towed back to port. But nobody ever found the crew. No bodies, no survivors, no trace. The missing crew of the Mary Celeste. So it all started back in 1872 when the Mary Celeste set sail from New York, commanded by Captain Benjamin Briggs. On board were his wife, daughter, and 7 other crew members. Everything seemed normal as the ship sailed into the vast Atlantic Ocean. Fast forward to December 4th of that same year, a passing ship, the Dei Gratia, spotted the Mary Celeste, and something was off. The ship was just floating there, no crew in sight. They boarded the Celeste to take a look around, and not a soul on deck, not a person in the rigging. It was like they vanished into thin air. Complete silence on the open sea. The ship wasn't in shambles either. The cargo was intact, and there was no damage to the vessel. Almost everything was intact, though. The only thing missing was a single lifeboat. But no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, just an empty ship drifting in the vastness of the ocean. The ship's log offered no clues either. The last entry was like any other day at sea. No hints of trouble, no distress signals. It was as if the crew just decided to abandon the ship for no apparent reason. Number 2, Flight 370. On March 8th of 2014, a routine flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The night was dark, the skies clear, but little did anyone know this would be no normal flight. As the Boeing 777 soared over the South China Sea, communication suddenly went silent. The plane vanished from radar, leaving air traffic controllers in complete shock and confusion. The plane had seemingly gone off the grid without a trace. Search and rescue teams searched the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, but the plane, along with 239 souls on board, seemed to have slipped into another dimension. The theory is that the incident was caused by mechanical failure, or, most likely, deliberate actions by the pilot. The aircraft had changed course and flew off the radar. No distress signal, no explanation. As months turned into years, there were only unanswered questions. Some said it was a hijacking, others claimed a government cover-up, but to this day, the mystery has never been solved. And finally, we have Bermeja. So we've talked about groups of people who have gone missing, flights that have gone missing, entire crews of ships, but how about an entire island just off the map? Bermeja was marked on maps, including those by the Mexican government, as a small island in the Gulf of Mexico. But when authorities tried to locate it in the 20th century, it seemed to have disappeared. In the 1920s and 30s, the Mexican government conducted maritime surveys, and Bermeja was part of the maps. Yet, when the government needed to confirm its coordinates for a maritime boundary agreement with the United States in the 70s, several expeditions were sent out to locate the island, but it was nowhere to be found. There are some interesting theories for this one, ranging from geological changes to cartographic errors. There's also a theory that it was intentionally removed or altered on maps for political reasons. But regardless, the fact remains that Bermeja, which had been marked on maps for centuries, seemingly vanished without any clear explanation. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.